Welcome to our last session. As before, we follow our pattern when we first have a talk on verification, the second talk will be on explainability. So our first talk will be given by Gagandeep Singh. He recently graduated from ETH Zurich, and he is working on automated reasoning tools and methods for verification of deep learning models and among other things. He is now a researcher at VMware Research, and he will start as an assistant professor at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign this fall. So I'll pass to Gagandeep. Thank you for being here and for presenting.
Thanks for introduction, Nina, and welcome everyone. So in this talk, I will talk about our recent work in this direction and also present a few open problems in this space. So this talk is based on work with a lot of people, not only mine. So my previous supervisors at ETH Zurich and also a bunch of PhD, masters and undergraduate students. Okay, so I will just start with a philosophical slide in the sense that for me, what is the goal of AI at the moment is not to go superhuman, is basically you have some function in your brain that computes F. This function can be recognizing cars or recognizing text or whatever. And then the goal of artificial intelligence is to compute a function F star that is as close as possible to F. So the current goal for me of AI is to be able to artificially attain the same kind of functionality as the human brain. And as you know, because of deep learning, a lot of progress has been made in this direction. So we have adoption of AI systems in a variety of applications like machine translation. Everybody uses Google Translate, speech recognition with Alexa, in health, gaming, and also autonomous driving, right? So there is also like a push to somehow, I would say, market this thing that we are getting very close to superhuman performance, but recent research has shown that this is not the case. So you can actually fool these models into misbehaving on very simple examples where a normal human would not be expected to fail. So in this work that appeared 3 years ago, what they did was that they printed an image of turtle and then they rotated in special ways. This is called adversarial examples. So what happens is that once you process this image of rotated turtles with state-of-the-art neural networks, the neural network starts saying that this is no longer a turtle, but it's a rifle. If you show this kind of rotated image to a normal human being, he will say that no, this is still a turtle. So this is the kind of errors we want to eliminate, right? So at the moment, we don't want the neural networks to be doing, at least in the vision domain, to be doing something that a human cannot. But what we want is we want to eliminate these kind of obvious errors from the models. So similarly, there was an example, and this example was even shown in London Science Museum, where they just put a lot of stickers on the stop sign, and then the corresponding classifier could not detect that it's a stop sign. But if you show it to a normal human, they will say that this is a stop, right? So what we do is that we make very small changes which are going to be so small that you hope that a human will not be fooled by them. And then what we want to assure that the neural network will also not be fooled by them. So that is the ultimate goal of this field of work is to obtain models that are not fooled by these simple transformations. And this does not only occur in the vision domain, but you can also see it in other domains. Like in this case, in the speech recognition system, you can insert certain kind of sounds in the signal such that the signal is still sounds the same to a human, but a neural network behaves differently. Right? So these are all the examples of real world adversarial examples. There was also a work 2 years ago where they were playing a special kind of music in the background, and that was making Amazon Alexa uh, not being able to wake up, right? So they were having a denial of service attack where you play certain kind of special music in the background such that your device does not work, right? So this is a real issue which is state of the art models in any domain, that it is actually working on the examples in the test set, but if you produce examples that are still in the distribution of the training set of the classifier, but it does not occur in the test set, it can misbehave, right? So there's a lot of work, and I would say that this goes in the direction of like endless game of like cat and mouse, where people design attacks and then they design empirical defenses that give empirical guarantees. But what happens is that it becomes like a game. I design a strong attack, and then somebody devises a defense, and then uh, I devise even a stronger attack, and then you devise even a stronger defense, and you keep continuing like this. But what is the problem with this kind of approach is that it can go on forever. You will never get any kind of formal guarantees, and this is what we want to provide. What we want to provide is that once we verify a model that it is robust, that it cannot be attacked by adversarial example, no matter how hard you try, it's not going to work, right? So our motivation is to not get into this game of hide and seek of designing attacks and defenses. We want to provide formal guarantees once and for all. Okay, so before continuing, I will precisely state what is the problem that we are trying to solve. It's very important to see uh, this slide and like focus on the problem that we are trying to solve. Uh, so the problem that we are solving has three components. The first component is the one shown in the middle, which is the model neural network F. So currently in the setting, what we assume is that you have trained the model with whatever training method you have, and it is fixed. Now it's not going to be changed. So you have a fixed neural network F. Then you specify a set phi, which includes the set of inputs to the neural network where you don't want the network to fail. Ideally, what you would like is to have this set phi to be including all the images or all the sound signals that you can observe in the universe. But what happens is that it's very difficult to capture this set in terms of some formula in some logic, right? So what we do is we do not verify all the images of a car in the universe, but we verify subset of car, and we hope that this set is big enough to capture a large set of inputs, right? So this is up to the domain designer. They have to give us the set of inputs where they really don't want the neural network to fail. And then the third and last component is a post condition over the network outputs. So this can specify some safety property or or some reachability property or any kind of property. And what we want is that for all the inputs in the set file, the network output either satisfies the output property, or you want to produce counter examples where this property is not satisfied. And you can give that as a feedback to the network designer. Hey, look at these inputs, your network is failing. And then the network designer can try to fix it. And then you can try to verify again and see whether that property holds. So there are also approaches to like uh, train the network in a way so that these properties are satisfied. I will not go into the details of those, but I would just give an overview of how that kind of training is done, right? But our focus is on this problem where we are given a fixed network F, fixed phi, and fixed output property. And what we want is we want to verify whether the property holds or give a counter example, right? So this has been known to be an NP-hard problem. And before proceeding, I would just say that the whole area is quite rich. We have a number of dimensions of this certified artificial intelligence. So you have different application domains. Again, this list is not exhaustive. There are many more like dimensions, and in each dimension you have many other approaches. So you can have a vision classifier, systems classifier, gaming, aviation, and whatnot. And then you can have different kind of specifications based on the set phi and psi, right? So you can have you change the vision in the vision domain, you change the pixel intensity or you rotate the image, and you want to say that the classifier does not change. You can have fairness property and whatnot. And you also see different kind of architectures employed by employed in the state-of-the-art models like fully connected, LSTM, transformers, variational autoencoders, and whatnot. And the community has developed a variety of methods. I'm sure previous talks mentioned them, like based on mixed integer linear programming, assembly solving, convex relaxations, and so on. And the guarantees are also sometimes probabilistic and also deterministic, right? So in this direction, we have a framework uh, which which can handle a subset of the dimensions I show here. And our long-term goal is to be able to handle all these specification and application domain, right? So before proceeding with how this verification works, let me try to instantiate how the neural network verification problems is actually specified. So suppose you have a neural network uh, which can classify CIFAR10 images, right? Like in this case, suppose it even achieves 90%, 95% accuracy. So you are given an image in the test set I0, which the network correctly classifies as car. Then what you do is you define set of images that are very close to this I0. And you specify that by changing the pixel intensity. So you specify an L infinity ball of radius epsilon. Epsilon is a parameter. And this is again up to the domain designer to choose what is the radius of this epsilon ball. So that basically determines the set of images that you want to verify, right? So when you specify this L infinity ball, what it means is that each pixel in the image, like x0, x1 here, will not take a single value, but it will take a set of values, right? Depending upon the parameter epsilon. So here, each pixel can take up to 17 different values, right? And you want to verify that all the images that will be in this set will be classified as car. Again, it is very important, and this comes up very often, is whether you should be verifying this phi or not, because uh, it is up to the domain designer to fix this epsilon, right? So if you make this epsilon too large. And sometimes what happens is that this becomes like a race in the community where we are trying to verify larger and larger epsilons. So if you specify very large epsilons, it can happen that some of the images in phi are no longer looking as car to a human even. So in that case, uh, I think it is fine if the model misbehaves, right? So if you cannot recognize the image as a car, then it's fine that the neural network also doesn't. But what we want is that we don't want that the image is obviously looking like a car to the human, but the neural network says that it's not a car, right? So here a domain designer says that, hey, I'm confident that if I chose an epsilon of 8 by 255, all the images are valid car images, valid meaning that it will be recognized as a car by the human, right? It's again uh, different domains, you would get different epsilon and you may even get different phis, right? So that is completely up to the domain designer. So the issue is that what you can do is that you can take all the images in this set and then propagate them one by one through the neural network and see whether they're classified as car. The issue with that is that this set is very big. And if you do this, even on the fastest supercomputer in the world, it might take the end of this universe to run. And this approach is not feasible. Just to give you a flavor of what is possible, a lot of times scalability issue comes up saying that, hey, your verification does not scale, but we are able to verify neural networks with 1 million neurons and 34 layers in around 30 milliseconds with this kind of epsilon. Okay, another example is you take the same image I0, then you rotate it between some angle. In this case, -10 to +10 degrees. And hypothesis is again that if I rotate this original image between -10 to +10, it will still be classified as a car. Right? This is again you want to verify. So we have like the first verifier in this direction, and we can handle arbitrary geometric transformations like rotation, translation, scaling, and we can scale to large neural networks as well. I would like to also show examples in the audio domain. Here you have an original signal S0 that is classified as stop. And then what you do is you perturb the signal intensity at each point in time. And you say that my signal can take some range of values. And this range is still so small that you would still perceive it as a stop. And you want to verify that all the signals will be classified as stop. So we have the first verifier in this direction, and it's reasonably scalable again. So there are, I would say that the current approaches for certification can be broadly classified into two types: exact methods, meaning for the problem I showed in the beginning, like here, it can solve this problem exactly. So it can either verify that the property holds, or it can give you a counter example, right? So the issue with this is that sometimes they are not as scalable. So they cannot scale to 1 million neurons, as I showed before. And then the other kind of methods are approximate methods. So they trade some kind of precision for scalability. So what happens is that they can provide answer like this, that um, that my property is satisfied, but they may not be able to find counter examples. So you trade some of the precision to gain more scalability. There are a number of methods in that direction. Uh, so overall, the key challenge is that you want to build a verifier that scales to large state-of-the-art models, but are also precise enough to verify the property that you want to verify. So in Iran, the tool that we have, we combine both exact methods and approximate methods to achieve state-of-the-art scalability and precision. Okay, rest of this talk, I will be focusing on the vision domain, and the specification phi and psi will be based on changes to the intensity. The property that we will be verifying will be robustness. We will be looking at a fully connected network with value activation, and I will show how convex relaxations and the combination of mixed integer linear programming and relaxations can be used to verify these properties, and the guarantees we will be providing are deterministic. Again, the source code, if you really want to check out this framework, is available online. Okay, so let's look at this toy neural network, which we will be using to convey the ideas that we use in Eran for verification. So in this example, we have an input layer which has two neurons, X1 and X2, and we have in the output layer also two neurons, X9 and X10, and between those we have two hidden layers which have two neurons each again. So X3 and X4 are the result of the affine transformation on the inputs, and then you apply value on them to get output X5 and X6 and so on, right? And for the affine transformation, the weights are obtained by following the edges. So if you follow the edges, you have X3 is equal to X1 plus X2, and X4 is equal to X1 minus X2. So in this case, a domain designer has figured out that I really don't want my neural network to be failing when X1 and X2 are between -1 to 1, right? So the domain designer wants that when X1 and X2 are taking these values, my output at X9 should be less than or equal to 3. So the domain designer says, let's say for me as a certifier designer, I get a contract that proves to me that when the inputs are between this range, X9 is less than or equal to 3. If it's more, then something bad happens, right? So one of the popular approaches here is that you can encode the whole problem as a mixed integer linear program. So what you will do is you would say that to give me the maximum value of X9 that can be obtained with respect to a set where X1 and X2 are between -1 to 1, and you specify the affine transformations that X7 is equal to X5 plus 2 times X6 minus 1, and you also specify the value, which is the max operator, and then you give it to a mixed integer linear programming solver and ask it, give me the maximum value of X9 under this encoding. And if this is less than or equal to 3, I have verified the property that I want to verify. The issue with that approach is that each max, the value corresponds to a branch. So what the value says is that if its input is negative, then the output is 0, or if it's positive, then the output is equal to the input, right? So this corresponds to a branch, right? So now you can imagine if the solver has to explore 100 of neurons, where it has to take a branch for each neuron, then the number of branches is going to grow exponentially. So when that happens, this kind of approaches based on mixed integer linear programming, they do not scale, right? So the approach that we take for designing our tools is based on an elegant mathematical framework of abstract interpretation invented in 1970s by Patrick and Nadia Cousseau. So remember that what we wanted to verify was that the outputs at f of phi should be inside psi is the property that we want to verify. What we do is instead of computing f of phi, we compute an abstraction of g of phi, right? So we compute a superset of f of phi, right? So if the superset is included inside psi, then you have also proved that f of phi also satisfies that property. But because G is bigger than F, it can happen that the difference between F and G is so much that you are not able to verify the property. So there can be false positives. But the guarantee is that whenever we are able to verify, the property holds. But when we cannot verify, we don't know the answer. So that is the guarantee that we give. So the main tension in abstract interpretation is to how to obtain this G of phi, which is as precise as possible, while is also scalable, right? So in terms of high level idea, what happens is that we take phi symbolically, like in this case, you specified L infinity ball saying that each pixel is within this interval. And then what happens is that you symbolically propagate this phi to the neural network. And each step, what is the guarantee? The guarantee is that the output that I will compute, like here, here, and at the end, will be a superset of the output that the neural network will be computing. So when you do like normal classification, you have an input image, and then it gets transformed by affine transformation, value transformation, and so on. And what we have to do is we have to design transformations such that when you apply a affine transformation on this phi, you get an output that includes the actual output, right? So what a popular approach is, what you can do is that there are already like popular abstractions that people use in program analysis community, like based on boxes. You can say that each pixel take some input and out some values in a range, or there are other shapes based on octagon, zonotope, and polyhedra. And people try to apply it for neural network verification. The the issue is that these abstractions were designed for the programs, and when you try to verify neural networks, you get a very different setting. So because these abstractions were not designed for programs, they are not as effective on neural networks. So we had to design custom abstractions that work very well for neural networks, but may not be suitable for program analysis. Okay, so let's look at how the box analysis will work in this setting. So you would associate a lower bound and an upper bound with each neuron in the network. So you would say that x1 and x2 is between -1 to 1. Then you do an affine transformation. You get that x3 and x4 are between -2 to 2. And then you take the value will chop off the negative part. And if you continue like this, in the end, you would get that the range of x9 is 0 to 5. And as you see, this is not enough to prove the property, because we wanted to prove that x9 upper bound is 3, but here is 5. Why this analysis fails is that it treats every neuron in the network independently, and it does not capture relationship between the neurons that occur because of the affine transformation or value and so on. So in this direction, we have designed a custom abstraction, which we call deep poly. It's the relaxed form of polyhedra that I showed here. So in this deep poly, we capture the box constraints, but we also capture relational constraints. So for each neuron, we have interval bounds, and we also have polyhedral bounds. We will see an example of this soon, and we have custom approximations of the nonlinear activations used in neural networks like ReLU, Sigmoid, Tangent, and MaxPool, it is less expressive than general polyhedra, because in polyhedra, you can have an arbitrary number of linear constraints, but to gain scalability in deep poly, we have the constraint that each neuron can only have two constraints. One is the lower bound and one is the upper bound. Relational constraints, I mean. In terms of complexity, what you see is that if you do ReLU in the polyhedra domain, it has exponential complexity, while we can handle the ReLU in constant time. Okay, before proceeding how this analysis will work, I would like to show how the ReLU actually looks. So as I said, ReLU, when it is negative, the output is 0, otherwise the output is equal to input. So it is a piecewise linear function when it's specified on a range of inputs. Then in the literature, there are a lot of approximations of this ReLU function, right? So when you design an approximation of this ReLU, what you want is that you want to include all the points that occur in the exact encoding, right? So you want to include all the points in this green, which is included in this box encoding, which is the one I showed before. Then there is this triangle relaxation, which for some time was considered the best convex approximation. Just remember this. And then you have other relaxations based on Zonotope. So in Zonotope, we have more points than triangle, and that's why it's less precise than triangle. While what you can see is that a misconception is that the Zonotope is more precise than box. It is not. It is incomparable, because the set of points in the Zonotope is not included inside the box. Then in deep poly, what we do is deep poly relaxes the triangle relaxation. In triangle relaxation, you have two lower bounds and one upper bound. As I said, in deep poly, we can have only one lower bound. So we select one of the lower bound of the triangle relaxation based on a heuristic. Right? And that is done for scalability reasons. So how the analysis with deep poly works? Remember in the box case, we had only the interval constraints. In deep poly, for X3 and X4, we have the box constraint as before, but we also capture relational constraints between the neurons. So here, because of the affine transformation, we also have the constraint that X3 has to be equal to X1 plus X2, and X4 has to be equal to X1 minus X2. In next setting, you would process the ReLUs. In this case, since in deep poly, we can have two ReLU relaxations, either one of these. We select the one with the lower area. In this case, this one is selected. So this is the output you get. Again, what you see is that you have the box constraints as before, but you also have more polyhedral constraints. So because computing this ReLU involves constant number of addition and multiplication, the runtime is constant. The most interesting step of the deep poly analysis is after the ReLU, when you do affine transformation, you want to compute the box constraints for X7. See here, the issue is that the deep poly, when you want to compute the ReLU output, you need upper and lower bound LX and UX for the input, right? So if we are going to process a ReLU after this X7 transformation, we need an input, lower bound and upper bound, right? So what we do is we have an approximate method to compute this lower and upper bound, which we call back substitution, right? So you can formulate minimizing and maximizing X7 with respect to this deep poly constraint, which includes all the constraints for X1 to X6, right? As an LP, we solve it approximately using a method called back substitution. It in practice gives, in most of the cases, same results as an LP, and the complexity is is lower than an LP. So if you do that, you get that the bounds for X7 is 4, while if you did the box analysis, it was 5, right? So you get improvement compared to box. So if you keep propagating it with the deep poly analysis, the bound for X9 is now 4 instead of 5. So you get an improvement, but it's still not enough to prove the property, right? So then in the next method, what we do is we combine abstract interpretation with mixed integer linear programming, right? So the key idea here is that you create a synergy between abstract interpretation and MILP, right? So what is the key bottleneck for MILP? So the bottleneck for MILP is that it has to explore large number of branches. So what you can do is you can use the abstract interpretation results to eliminate some of the branches. So if you can prove that a given neuron only takes positive or negative value with abstract interpretation, you do not need to explore that branch. So this kind of approach boosts the scalability of the method, right? And then you can ask the solver to give me the maximum value of X7. So see, in this deep poly, we were formulating everything as an LP, and then we solve it approximately as an LP to get the bounds for X7. Now what we will do is we will formulate the whole thing as a mixed integer linear program, but compared to the vanilla mixed integer linear program I showed before, we will also add the constraints that we get from abstract interpretation analysis. What is the result of this method is that it reduces the search area for the verifier. So instead of saying that I don't know the value of X3 and X4, it can be anything between minus infinity to plus infinity. I say it's between minus 2 to 2, right? And then I ask the solver, what is the value of a maximum value of X7? So that returns as 3. Again, if you see the deep poly approximation, the output depends upon L7 and U7, right? So if you reduce the value of U7, you get a smaller area and you improve the abstraction. So this kind of approach is synergistic because you apply the abstract interpretation bounds to improve the scalability of the solver, while you use the solver result to improve the precision of the abstract interpretation method. So in this case, with this kind of refinement, you can prove that the upper bound for X9 is 3, right? So this approach improves the precision of the deep poly that I showed before. So the issue is that even though with providing the deep poly bounds improve the scalability of the verifier of the solver, it is still, when you get a very deep network, the scalability of this method, like refining with MILP, is not so much. So then what people try to do is they said, let's replace this max with triangle constraints, right? Because that was assumed was the best that you can do in terms of convex relaxation. It is more precise than the deep poly approximation. So you replace all the max constraints for X5 and X6 with the triangle constraints. And then you ask the LP solver, give me the maximum value of U7. In this case, you get 4, which was the same as with the deep poly analysis. So you actually do not get any benefit. And then we were kind of stuck in the sense that you cannot refine too much with MILP because it stops scaling after a while. While when you try to verify with the best convex relaxation, you do not see any precision improvement. So it was even said that this is a convex barrier. You cannot do better than this triangle. And the issue is, and then we said that this is not the best triangle approximation. Triangle approximation is not the best convex relaxation. So let's look at how this triangle relaxation works. So triangle relaxation processes each neuron separately. So when triangle needs to compute the output bounds, it only looks at the interval bounds for its input. Like if it wants to compute for x5, it will only look at that x3 is between -2 to 2. So this kind of convex approximation forgets all kind of constraints that exist between x3 and x4. As a result, if you were to visualize the output in x5 and x6 plane, you get a pentagon. So the insight was that we will also look at the relational constraints between the inputs. So see here, the input set when you compute the triangle relaxation is a set of box constraints for x3 and x4. What we do is we also capture the relational polyhedral constraints between x3 and x4, and then instead of processing the each values independently and separately, we process them together. Like in this case, we will compute the output for x5 and x6 together, right? So what you will do is you would, because you have two inputs, you would have 4 different parts that x3 and x4 are negative and x5 and x6 are 0. And when they are positive, the output is same as the input. So because of the value, you get 4 different parts. So you intersect the input set S with these constraints arising from value, and then you compute the convex hull of these constraints, right? So you don't have to go into the detail, but what happens is that because of this kind of relaxation, we are able to discover these constraints between x5, x6, x3, and x4 that you could not before. Because the triangle relaxation processes x5 and x6 separately, it has no way of generating a constraint that will have x5, x3, and x4 together. And if you want to visualize it in the x5 and x6 plane with the k value, which means k is the number of values that you want to process together. In this case, it's 2. So if you visualize the output in the x5 and x6 plane, you get this shape, which is a triangle, and it is more precise than the triangle relaxation. So we were able to get convex relaxation that is tighter than the triangle relaxation, but is also more scalable than the MILP approach, right? So if you do, so now what you can do is you want to maximize x7. Now instead of using the triangle constraints and the MILP constraints, you use the k value constraints, and because of the k value constraints, you have this extra constraints between x5 and x7, x6, x3, and x4, and this allows you to verify the property that you want, right? So this analysis is more precise than deep poly, and it's more scalable than deep poly plus MILP. So this is currently one of the most precise and scalable methods out there. Okay, in terms of overview of Eran framework, what we can handle currently is like we can handle changes based on pixel intensity to images or geometric transformations or audio processing. And in the deep poly, in the Eran framework, we have a bunch of methods that a user can use that have different kinds of scalability and precision. So box is going to be the most scalable, but not very precise. And then you have this k poly, which is based on combining deep poly with k value and also mixed integer linear programming, right? And one nice thing about Eran is that we are sound with respect to floating point arithmetic. which means that when we give results when we give output, it captures all the behavior possible under different kind of rounding modes and the order of computations. And that is a strong guarantee compared with many other verifiers out there. And we also had the VNN competition last year, and we verified the highest number of benchmarks. In terms of, I just wanted to show some results here from VNN Comp. In terms of course, all these tools were done on different hardware, but there were 5 categories, and out of 4, we verified the most. Let's look at this small network here, 9 layers, 1000 neurons. What you see here is on the left hand, so we compare 2 methods, deep poly and K-poly, and what you see is that there is no pre-lunch. The K-poly, it is more precise, it verifies. So what you do is you take 1000 images, you verify 1000 L infinity balls, and then you see how many of these 1000 L infinity balls you can verify to be robust. So K-poly can verify 506, while deep poly only verifies half of those, but the runtime difference is huge. What you also see is that the runtime is not associated with the size of the network. If you have 1000 neurons here, K-poly takes longer than when the network has 62,000 neurons. We can also show results on larger networks. So here we compare state-of-the-art verifier. It's called Crown IBP with GPU Poly, which is a version of deep poly implemented on GPU. What you see here is that again, it's not related with the size of the network. Here, this network has 500,000 neurons. The runtime is 397, while here, this is 1 million neurons around, and we can verify in like 30 milliseconds. What you also see is there's a big tension between how you train the network. So if you train the network to be easy to prove, then GPU Poly has a great time verifying it. It runs very fast, but the accuracy of the classifier is not so much. So I would say that this is practically unusable classifier. It only has accuracy of 35%. So the biggest problem in this domain is to obtain networks that are provably robust, that you can verify to be robust, but are also accurate. So in the end, what you want is accuracy of like 90%, while also be having provability like this. I would not go into the details of geometric and audio because I'm running out of time. I just wanted to introduce how you can use the method that I showed based on abstract interpretation for actually training the network to be robust. So how this works is that you have 2 kinds of losses. One is the standard loss based on cross entropy or watt. The other is the robustness loss. So you train the network with these 2 losses together, and how you compute the robustness loss is you take the property that you want to verify, you compute the G of phi as before, and then in this G of phi, you compute the point which has the highest loss, right? So you define the loss, robust loss, and then you find the point in the output of G of phi which has the highest loss, and then you use that loss to update your weights. So using some of the methods that we developed, we have been able to get state-of-the-art accuracy and robustness for CIFAR 10. There are many dimensions that I did not show before. For example, there is a dimension of training, how you train the network. And then there is also, you can use some of the methods I explained here for interpretability as well. So I will basically discuss some of the open problems in this space. Is that whenever I present this kind of talk, the question is that can you verify all the images of a car or a horse or whatever? At the moment, we cannot. What we can verify is that local robustness changes to an input image that was classified correctly, that we hope still represents valid images or signals, right? but maybe you can train it generative models, and people are already looking into this direction. And then with respect to that generative model, you can verify a more expressive set. Open problem again, big criticism of this line of work is, can you scale to ImageNet? I think there are works in this direction, and we hope we can get there. But I would also like to contend is that the ImageNet is not not the only thing, right? There are other domains also where you don't have ImageNet, like finance and whatnot. And another, the big problem for me is actually be able to get networks that are robust and accurate. So there is the thing, right? At the moment, if you train the network with normal training, it is not robust, not a lot robust, I would say, but it's quite accurate. But when you train it to be robust, you are able to prove that it's robust, but it is not very accurate. We also want to develop custom solver that works for verifying all kind of deep learning models. And there's also work on checking whether your PyTorch or TensorFlow code is working correctly under the hood. And you want to combine all these methods, maybe as a runtime system that is secure. Right. So I would like to conclude this talk with the four most important slide, which should convey the basic idea of this talk. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Vadim. Do we have any questions? Yeah, I see someone. Whoever has a question, just speak up. Jan, you have a question, just go for it.
Oh, hello. I did not really have a question. I wanted to say thank you for a very good presentation. But since I now started talking, I wanted to ask you, you are probably familiar with the work by Anderson on the strong MLP formulations.
Yeah, I know.
I wonder, is there a relation to the cuts that you developed from not only using the triangle inequalities, but also considering multiple nodes? Is there a relation with those and some of the cuts that Anderson and they developed?
So Anderson, they had this work. I did not go into the details. So they had this work on. You are talking about the mixed integer linear programming, right?
Yeah.
So usually, like here. Okay. So when I did not show the exact MILP encoding. So the MILP encoding that we usually use is again kind of looking at only one neuron at a time. It is still exact. What Anderson etc. developed was similar, like it was kind of related to this k-ReLU, but for MILP, right? So what they do is they handle multiple neurons together. So that is a stronger formulation of MILP. The thing that we sometimes see is that it can, because you have more constraints than with the single neuron MILP formulation. So sometimes it becomes harder for the solver to solve, even though it is like it's kind of tighter relaxation, but because of the number of constraints, it can become harder.
Yeah,
so
no. I totally agree with you there. Like the number of possible linear inequalities really grow, that the model can get difficult to handle.
Yeah. So it is also the case with this k-ReLU, right? So in k-ReLU, what we do is that k is the number of ReLUs you handle together. So what we found is that if you have 5 ReLUs together, then it generates thousands of constraints. And because of that, it becomes very hard for the solver to solve. And the gains are not so much in terms of precision. So when we actually use in Iran, we use k is equal to 3 because empirically we found it to work the best in terms of precision and scalability. So there is some tension in how much you get by these extra constraints and how much it makes it difficult for the solver.
Okay. That's an excellent answer. The main thing I was kind of thinking there is if these additional inequalities that you obtain, if they could be like a subset of the Anderson et al. Inequalities, but I guess it's difficult to really say if that's the case or not.
Well, they are not the subset of what Anderson will get, but I mean, talking about syntactically, right? They are not the subset, but of course, the polyhedra that they encode includes the polyhedra that Anderson will have, right? Because it is a superset of the exact neural network behavior.
Okay. Thank you very much for your intuition and comments there. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Roland, you have a question.
Oh, I just want to clarify. I think on one of the slides there was something about sound floating point or something like that.
Yeah.
So I was wondering what that is.
So yeah. So there are like so I guess it's somewhere. Come on. It's here, right? What it means is that so recently there is work which basically shows that many of the times that people design verifier, they do not take into account the floating point errors, right? So you can have issues because of cancellations and whatnot. So many of the verifiers, they assume real arithmetic. Everything is performed with perfect numbers. And once you ignore the exact floating point behavior that your neural network can have, there can be issues that you say that the model is robust, but it's actually not because you did not consider the floating point behavior. So what we do is we guarantee with respect to the IEEE floating point standard that once we verify something with like abstract interpretation only, because the solvers, they are still not floating point sound, we are capturing all the floating point behavior. So, floating point computations, because of rounding, etc., they are not associative, right? So if you compute the results with different orders, you would get different results. And what we do is we capture all the outputs that are possible with different kind of orders of computation and also rounding mode. So
but the moment you go to the milk, then you don't have that anymore, right?
Yes, once you go to the milk, it's not sound, and we are trying to look into floating point LP solvers at the moment, where this is a custom solver where once you combine with this deep poly or whatnot, it will still be sound. But of course, at the moment, once we combine milk or LP solver with deep poly, it's not floating points.
Okay.
Any other question?
Do we have questions from the audience at Vienna?
Currently, there are no questions here.
I see. So in order, I wanted to discuss actually what you for maybe a minute the questions that you said when we train adversarially and then we get and verifier works well, right? And when we don't train adversarially, then verifier sometimes struggles. It feels like to train a network to be robust, and as a side effect, we see that verifier scales, then we basically make it more linear, right? Because,
yeah.
So it means that there is kind of quite a bit of a push to make it linear, that you get scalability for all the for many solvers. So it's not clear what do you have an intuition? What would be the best approach to train a robust network and don't reduce its expressivity too much to get something which is very close to linear? So it seems that what's happening now.
So another thing is this, that when is the instance hard to verify for the solver or even when the poly sector will lose precision, it happens when the network can take, the neuron can take both positive and negative values. So another thing that we have observed is this also depends upon the width of the interval, right? So if the interval width is small, then even if you have nonlinear behavior, it's easy for the solver to solve and also for the poly to not lose precision, right? So you can actually get robustness while also getting accuracy. The issue is,
Is it a ball? Have a small ball to train with very small ball or what?
yeah, so basically what we have observed is that when you train the networks to be robust, the weights of the networks are very tiny. So when you get, so why are these methods able to like the proof, when you train the network to be provable, why does these imprecise method like box, the poly and whatnot, they are very precise? It's because you not only have more linear behavior, but you also have a smaller range of the input neurons. And even and what happens because of that, let's look at this diagram here. Once Li and Ui are very small and close to zero, even if you do a box approximation, you do not lose that much of an area, right? Then you are quite close to each other. Now the question is whether by using that kind of an approach, we can get a robust and accurate network. I think we have hit a brick wall, and there is some sideways progress here and there to get something 1 or 2% more, but you need more new methods. And one thing that we have been thinking is like currently when you train the network, what you do is you compute this maximum point, the point, and then you compute the gradient with respect to that, and then you propagate it through the network. Another approach is to not do this kind of thing, but compute the gradient directly, right? Not compute the highest point on the point under which the loss is maximized, but you compute the gradient directly and propagate it using. So what happens at the moment is that we train with set of points, and then when we want to update the weights, we only look at a single gradient, but maybe you need to look at interval gradients, and that's what we have been looking into now.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting talk.